Okay, guys, we're going to get started again. This is Sarah Forcier from Pixar. Going to talk about RenderMan for Houdini.
Are you guys playing a video? Oh, I guess I'm going. Thought they're going to play video. Okay, cool. Wow, it is great to be here. Thank you for Side FMX for having me, and thank you guys for being here for this introduction to Pixar's brand new RenderMan for Houdini plugin. My name is Sarah Forcier, and I am the lead developer on RenderMan's integration into Houdini. So today I would like to give a little brief discussion about how I went about developing RenderMan for Houdini, and then also I'm going to dive into a live demo of the software. So hopefully the smoke simulation does not become actual smoke on my little laptop here. So before we dive in here, I'd love to get an idea of who's here today. So by a show of hands, who here is a current RenderMan user? Okay, a couple. And what about current RenderMan for Houdini users? Okay, well, hopefully we'll get a little more there. And then what about students? How many are students? Okay, a lot more there. Awesome. Well, I'm excited to show you what RenderMan for Houdini can do and how it's changed since the previous version, since it's a complete rewrite, so most has changed. So RenderMan development has been moving towards a goal of RenderMan everywhere, and part of this goal is being able to render anywhere in the pipeline. Since Houdini is such a large part of that pipeline, we wanted to bring the interactivity that RenderMan 22 provides us into Houdini and give those effects artists the advantage of seeing the changes they're making interactively. Because we already have that in RenderMan for Maya and RenderMan for Houdini, or Katana and Houdini now. And the way that we're able to bring this interactivity into the DCCs is because of all the development that we did in RenderMan 22 and a lot of the speed improvements that we made there. So this is a render, I guess, of a pretty complex scene. There's about 6 gigabytes of texture and about 7 million polygons. And it's a comparison between RenderMan 22, RenderMan 21, and 20. And so if I hit the big red button, which you're told usually not to do, you'll see the difference. Immediately, we've got 22 time to first pixel, and then 21 a little afterwards, and then we're still waiting for 20 there sometime. Okay, there we go. So first pixel for RenderMan 22 is 4 seconds. 22 or 21 was at 20 seconds, 22, and then RenderMan 20 was a little last there. So this RenderMan 22, that speed that you just saw, and that is what we wanted to bring into Houdini. And that is what we did. So usually when I'm asked to talk about the work that I've done on RenderMan 20, or RenderMan for Houdini, I usually just say, well, it just works, which is not quite a full answer. But what I mean by that is if RenderMan for Houdini is doing its job, or really any interactive renderer, the changes that you're making in Houdini that show up in the viewport, they'll just show up in the render. And slowly, hopefully, the renderer will replace the viewport, and you'll just be able to see something that's closer to a final product much sooner. And I was able to achieve this by integrating 22 into RenderMan, or sorry, RenderMan 22 into Houdini, and also by interfacing with Houdini's C++ APIs. And so I was able to get a much tighter integration over the previous version, which was using Soho, which is Python's bindings for communicating with the renderer. And then the last bit about the whole it just works is being able to provide intuitive workflows. So if there's already a workflow in Houdini, we wanted to just use that instead of adding a bunch of different ways of doing it. The way I always thought about it was if there was no documentation for RenderMan for Houdini, how would an artist go about setting up a feature? And that is the way I wanted to implement it. Granted, we do have documentation, so don't worry. So I've listed a couple highlights. As you might have picked up, interactivity is a huge theme. I've probably said it 10 times, and I'll say it many more times before this session is over. Material Builder is one example of this sort of intuitive workflow that I was talking about. A Material Builder is a way of setting up materials with the shading networks that's in Houdini. And we wanted to provide a way of doing that with RenderMan shaders. And so we created a Pixar Material Builder that works the same way as the one that's currently in Houdini. And then preset browser and light filters, which I could talk about, but I think would be better just to show. So I'm going to dive into my demo, switch over to Houdini, minimize that. Great, awesome. So I have a scene set up here already. It's got the RenderMan teapot, which is the RenderMan team's mascot. And this was modeled in Maya and then exported as a Limbic before being brought into Houdini. We also have a Houdini Pyro simulation, which has been cached to disk as BGO. And so this is what the scene looks like. It's an exploding teapot. Luckily, the teapot is made out of some sort of indestructible material. I should ask about that. But no teapots were harmed in the making of this. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a camera. And then I'm going to create a render node, which you'll see right up here. And the shelf button that I just clicked is going to both create the render node, the RenderMan ROP, as well as attach a path tracer to the render. And that is all I need to hit render. And, oh, yep, OK. So let me, sorry, technical difficulties. So I can go into my render ROP and override the camera resolution so that when I hit render again, it will fit in the window a little better. There we go. Awesome. So the first thing I'm seeing is, well, I'm rendering to RenderMan's image tool, or it, because that seemed like a clever name. So it is called it. And we also support rendering to Houdini's mplay or render view. I use it just because it provides additional tools that I really like. And one of those is the object selection tool. So what I can do is I can select the object in the render, and it gets selected in Houdini. So I can click around, click my teapot, the lid, the feet. It's just kind of a handy tool. But I'm going to do it to click on the background because I'm noticing that it's not subdivided. So once it's selected, I can use the RenderMan menu to subdivide. And voila, subdivided. So this tool is just a way of setting attributes on the geometry. So I could also dive into the node and change it there. It's just that the RenderMan menu provides handy, less clicks. So the other thing I'm noticing in both the render and the viewport is I'm not sure if the teapot's actually sitting on the ground plane or if it's floating in space. It's kind of hard to tell with the lighting. So what I can do, and this is somewhat unique to RenderMan, is creating integrators. So right now I have a path tracer that's attached to my render. And what I can do is create a Pixar occlusion integrator and attach that to the ROP node. And when I do that, we've changed to occlusion. And it's quite fast already. And then I can change different settings on this. I could use albedo. Granted, there's not really any shaders, so that's not quite as fun. But the reason I did this was because I wanted to get my teapot to rest on my ground plane. So once again, I've selected my geometry in the render, and I'll just transform it until I see that shadow. And then I can just get my teapot just to sit right on top. Great. So that was integrators. We have a couple others. If you look in the tab menu, we've got debug shading context, direct lighting, for example. I'm going to create another one, the Pixar visualizer, and once again attach that to the render. So it's somewhat of a glorified viewport, it looks like, but we also have the bounding box here. We have a nice wireframe. If we can go in here, we can change the color of the wireframe, because why not? Once again, we haven't had to stop rendering at all. We've been changing integrators, to transforming things, and we'll do a lot of different edits later. We can turn off the wireframe. Anyway, just playing around here. But I'm going to go back to the path tracer, because we're going to dive into doing some shading. And so back to this. Awesome. So right now, I have default lighting and default shading, except for my explosion. I've already shaded that. And so shading with RenderMan, you can create your BXDFs, you can wire in patterns, you can change settings, all from scratch. Just drop in nodes, with sort of Houdini nodes connecting them. But another way of doing it, if you're not like me, like a crazy good, well, you don't have to be crazy good, but I prefer using the preset browser because it's a great way to start with a shading network that already looks really good, and then you can tweak it the way you want it to look. So this preset browser is also in Maya and Katana too, in the same exact UI. So it's also great for trading or sharing different materials across the DCCs. So you can see with shipped with RenderMan, we have all these different parameters or materials over here. I'm going to create a blue marble and import this. When it's imported, it's created in the material network. You can see it right there. And so I can just drag it onto my teapot, and then now I have a blue marble teapot, which is not the official teapot because that would be really expensive to make. So, so if you dive into this material, you can see that the preset browser has created a Pixar surface and wired into that. You can see it if it's zoomed in a little bit. With all the parameters already set. So they've already set some specular, subsurface, and then they've wired in a Pixar OSL with additional parameters. And all of this is within a material builder node. And one of the great parts about a material builder is the ability to promote parameters. So right now, if you look at the network, there's a ton of different parameters that you might not necessarily care about. Or if you're sharing the shader with someone else, you don't want them to play with them because you've already tuned them the way you want. So what you can do is you can promote parameters. So I can promote, say, the texture scale and maybe one of the colors. And what this does is it puts the parameters on the outer subnet material node. And then I can go in here and I can edit the texture scale, or I can change the color. So it's just a great way of like extrapolating away and like hiding stuff that you don't really want to see, and another great way of sharing, because once again, I can right-click this and I could create a digital asset and then share that with other people if I was like really attached to my shaded network. Another way would be to create a RenderMan material asset, and then that would be put into your preset browser, and then you could give that away to Maya or Katana, and someone else could start lighting in Katana, for example. So I've done the same thing with my fire shader, where I've promoted two different parameters, the diffuse color and the exposure. So if I jump ahead a little more in my simulation, I can see if I change the diffuse color, it'll change the smoke color. So I could make it kind of like a purpley, or I could make like a poisonous green color, I guess. Or I can just maybe lighten up the smoke. I could also change the exposure, make it a really hot fire, or more of a lame or stimulation, I guess. Anyway, but I like that. So that was kind of an introduction, I guess, to shading, although I haven't actually shown you the official teapot material. So this material, like the teapot itself, was made in Maya and exported once again through the material or the preset browser. So I'm going to import this and just apply it to the shader. And that is our official teapot for last year, I guess, or this year too. And voila. So I didn't have to do any work of like setting up the textures or toggling any parameters. Like that's already been done by someone else in Maya and then exported to me. And so that I immediately get this great looking teapot. Cool, yeah, so that is shading. So you can start from scratch, you can put all your BXDFs down, or you can use the preset browser. Both of them work. So I'm gonna transition over to lighting, but before I do that, I also want to mention with the preset browser, you can create light rigs. And there are some that are shipped also with RenderMan. And so if you have a really cool lighting setup and you want to share that, you can do that as well. And it'll save where the lights are, what colors they are, and all the parameters as well. So right now, I'm lighting it with the default auto headlight, which is just a distant light. And so I'm going to first drop down an environment daylight just to get a little more realistic of a look, which immediately makes my teapot super dark because of where the sun is. And then I'm going to back up a little because I don't like my ground plane. So I'm going to create another material. Oh. There we go. I'm going to create like a wood floor. It'll just look a little better. Okay, same thing as before. We create it in the material network and then just drag it onto the floor. Great, I like that a lot better. So back to my object network. So I created this environment daylight, but my teapot's still pretty dark. So I'm going to create another light. I'm going to zoom in kind of right in front of the teapot and create a rect light, which I have in my shelf. And then I've just dropped it right in front of the teapot. And so it's not quite bright enough because it's not right in front of the teapot. So I'm going to scale it up till I get a nice highlight on my RenderMan logo. And turn up the exposure. Great. So now you can see it a lot better. And so this is kind of, interactive lighting, moving your lights around, putting them seen. I could add sphere lights, cylinder lights. We have volume lights, which are essentially mesh lights, but for volumes. Another great feature of RenderMan lights is light filters. So I'm going to demonstrate that really quickly. So I can create another light. We're going to create a disc light right on top of the teapot. The same way I made my rec light. And I'm looking to make it I'll make it a little bigger just so we can see the brightness of the lid. Once again, turn up the exposure. There we go, super bright, awesome. And so I'm going to create a barn light filter and parent it to the disc light, just so that they're at the same spot location. And then all I have to do is attach the barn light filter shader to the light. And I can just drag that on there into the shaders. Great. And then, so they're attached, but I have to, if I change all the settings, it'll be like a lot clearer. So if we change to analytic, you can see the outline there of the barn light filter. And so what I'm trying to go for is kind of like a spotlight effect. So I can change my width, make it more circular, and then have a little edge. So yeah, that's a spotlight. But one thing I noticed when I was making that was it was making the smoke from my fire simulation super hot. And so one of the things I can do is light linking, essentially, which is telling the renderer which lights I want to illuminate which objects. So if I wanted the disk light not to illuminate that smoke, I could go into that geometry, which is my pyro import. And in the render tab, there's all these masks, which are Houdini parameters. And they're essentially saying, at least for the light mask, these are all the lights that will illuminate this object. And right now, it's everything. But I can say everything except for the Pixar disk light. And you can see, all of a sudden, I don't have that contribution in my smoke. I could do the same thing for the ground plane with the same light as well, to a super more obvious effect, because all of a sudden, the spotlight will go away. But I did a lot of work for that spotlight, so I'm going to put it back. Instead, maybe hide the rec light, which got rid of that influence of that, so the spotlight is even more clear. So that was lighting, I guess, and shading. There's a lot more that I could show, such as editing geometry, editing volumes, all those sort of things. But I have one more thing that I want to show that is new to both RenderMan for Houdini and also RenderMan as of 22.5, and that is interactive displacement. So I have another geometry in the scene, which is our RenderMan logo, not the mascot. So I'm going to hide the other ones just because they're slightly distracting. And also the disk light, I'm going to disable that. And so this is the RenderMan logo. It is just the name. And turn up the exposure. Great. So So this is our RenderMan logo. And I've attached a shader to this, and I can use the shader selection tool in it as well. And it's the same idea with the object selection. If I click on an object that has a shader attached, it'll just take me straight to that shading network, which is super handy, nice little shortcut. And so you can see this shader has both a Pixar surface attached as well as a Pixar displacement. And now this Pixar displacement has 0 amplitude at the current moment. And I'll turn that on in a second, but it's a lot easier to see if there's a little bit of a specular lobe there. So there we go. It's a little specular now. Actually, that's a lot specular. But and then if I turn up my displacement, say like 0.25, you can see all of a sudden we have that displacement. Now it's kind of chunkier. And let me zoom in so you can see that really well. So this is interactive displacement. So once again, it kind of just works. You can also change the frequency to make it bumpier. So yeah, that is interactive displacement. So that's kind of what I have for the demo. I'm going to kind of wrap it up and go back to the slides. And I do want to mention one more time, that whole entire time, we didn't have to stop rendering at all. We could make all of our edits, shading, lighting, and just let the render keep going. So switching back to the slides. So I showed a little lighting and shading, but if you tweak a lot of more parameters and add some pretty lights, this is what the final render of the teapot looks like in all of its lovely glory. So. Okay, cool. So I don't have time, obviously, to show everything that both Houdini and RenderMan can do together, but we do support a lot of other features like velocity motion blur. I mentioned volume lights as well. We support the Houdini geometry such as prac primitives, OpenVDB, Houdini volumes. Our texture manager will just automatically convert your textures, and so on and so forth. So a lot of good stuff in there. So yeah, so we're actually releasing, we're launching, that's sad. Well, anyway, you can read one of them. We're releasing next week our RenderMan 22.5, which will come with RenderMan for Houdini. And if you already have a RenderMan license, you can just go download RenderMan for Houdini, and I really hope you do. And so yeah, that is RenderMan for Houdini. Thank you for listening. Does anyone have any questions?
Oliver does.
Thank you for the presentation. It's incredible, like the stability and all the stuff you can do. It looked like a good option for us, I guess. So,
Awesome.
But I got a few questions. So first of all, I saw you doing the light masks using like the standard Houdini workflow.
Yeah.
But then I saw you setting like subdiv on the RenderMan tab. Why didn't you use the Houdini subdiv thingy? Why don't you just support that?
RenderMan, or sorry, the Houdini parameter?
In the render, yeah.
Yeah, so that parameter is actually like very specific for mantra, and so we wanted to make sure we had a RenderMan specific one. So it's the parameter itself is like mantra
okay, cool. Got
graphics, I guess. So that's why.
So then the second question: do we have in the shader builder? You just support your Pixar nodes, right?
Yes.
All
No
the Houdini nodes are gone.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, cool. But it's OSL, so we can do pretty much everything, right?
Yeah.
Cool. So, and the next thing, last question, is I saw support for everything like pack pack geometry, everything. What don't you support? Is there anything you don't support?
We don't support material style sheets, although
We don't. Okay, no, I'm not saying anything, but we don't need it.
Okay, okay. Wait, hold on. You get a little prize for asking all your questions.
Hey, great talk, thank you. Are you somehow reserving, and I'm assuming that you're reserving cores to keep the interactivity of the viewport, is that correct?
For render view, or?
No, for being able to still navigate in the viewport and doing things and tweaking shaders and everything?
Oh yeah, that was super easy to navigate around, yeah.
Is that somehow controllable? Like, can I say how many cores I want to reserve for this, or is this?
Oh, for rendering?
For rendering and for the viewport and everything.
For the viewport, I'm not sure if Houdini, maybe Houdini allows that, but for rendering, or for RenderMan, you can say how many cores you want to use for rendering.
Okay, okay, that's fine. Cheers.
You also got a little baggy.
Do you have like a last thing to do with the?
It's okay if you. I mean, I do, but.
If you want to do it, let's do it.
One more, okay.
One more.
One more question, okay.
Ask a question.
Oh, I ask a question.
Ask them to.
Oh, I wasn't planning that.
That's what Dylan does.
Oh, okay, great. Who knows the release date for Toy Story 4? Go for it.
July 23rd?
No. That was too hard. What was that? Yes.
June 21st.
That's for you. Great.
You're the
well,
big
and you
winner.
get the Toy Story 3 because the Toy Story 4 book is not out yet. So, yeah, you can come up afterwards.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yep.